Thank you very much indeed.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
Do you want, just for the camera, can you introduce name and role? And then I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay.
So my name is Nick Rasmussen. I'm currently serving as the Senior Director for Counterterrorism and National Security Programs at the McCain Institute for International Leadership in Washington.
And you've been through 3 administrations.
I had served in government for a long period of time, up until last December, when I stepped down from government service after 27 plus years of government service. My last.
And one of the rare people who actually made the transition from the current
from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, where I did serve for the first year of the Trump administration.
So
yes.
You are rare indeed in Washington,
yes,
and we appreciate your service.
Somewhat of a unicorn status for having crossed over from one administration to the other. Yes.
Well, we appreciate your contribution to the debate and discussion here. I just wanted to sort of get your feedback on a couple of things. One, the significance of maybe doing this in Doha, and then 2, that sort of balance between the government and civil society, and where that responsibility lies as we address this issue of returning fighters.
Sure. I think it was appropriate to have this discussion in Doha because Doha, the Qatari government certainly understands the challenge posed by foreign fighters. They are, in a sense, a frontline state, watching what has happened in the Iraq and Syria conflict, and it has certainly spilled over into their world, and certainly some number of Qatari nationals have certainly ended up participating in the conflict. So I'm nothing but positive things to say about our colleagues in the Qatari government for bringing this, for being willing to host this, along with our colleagues at the Soufan Center at Georgetown and QS as well.
Oh, thank you. And this sort of balance of government organizations and sort of civil society, as we address this issue, clearly it's not a regional issue, it's a global issue.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that sort of balance is now, and how should it be between government and civil society?
Well, I guess this is something where my approach personally has changed over time, and I see much more of
both perspectives.
Well, I have much more of a sense now that civil society does have a critical role to play in the counterterrorism arena. As we discussed in the panel discussion today, government is not always going to be best positioned, particularly with individuals who are radicalized and mobilized to violence in small communities, and not as part of some massive group, not as part of a group like joining ISIS or joining Al-Qaeda, but instead these homegrown radicals or violent extremists are individuals who will be much more capably dealt with in a local setting than they will be by national governments. And I think it's our job in national government to try to empower local communities to do a better job.
Squirrel Hill, the atrocities of the last few days and 11 dead, I think makes that point, doesn't it?
Well, it also reminds me that extremism can come in all forms. And while here we're talking at this conference about foreign terrorist fighters, and particularly those who might have attached themselves to the ISIS brand or the ISIS ideology, extremism does come in many forms, and if communities and governments are going to be able to respond to extremism, they have to recognize that it does come from across the ideological spectrum. And violent extremism is anti-society and anti-the good everywhere, regardless of whether it's left or right. Exactly. If we ought to be able to unify around the idea that extremism is one thing, but violent extremism, and certainly violent extremism that causes loss of life or brings harm to individuals, particularly to innocent individuals, is something we can all unify our societies around. And I think unifying against the extremism, violent extremism in all forms, the narrative and the media narrative seems to be the poles and the extremes, as opposed to that sort of voice of the moderate majority in the middle. Do you think there's a way of bringing voice and news to the moderate majority in the middle? I hope so, but I'm not optimistic in the current environment, and I guess I'm speaking narrowly and selfishly and specifically about the United States right now, but it seems our politics are so toxic right now that you're constantly put in a position where if you say something on one side, the other side is left to say, but what about this? And rather than finding common ground, we end up looking for ways to out-argue each other. I think that phrase you said of common ground, the only way we're all going to come together is everybody giving a little
and finding common ground that we can connect in on a human and an individual basis?
Well, and I would say usually we look to our leaders to take us to that common ground, and in moments of crisis in the United States in the past, our leaders have taken us to common ground. So I would hope that leadership would start at the top on this.
Well, we'll hope we can get to common ground. We can bring together and unite around the right ideals. But
yes.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you for attending this event.
It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you to the Soufan Center and to the other sponsors for a remarkable event.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.